in this part of the AWS Cloud Security Service, which is the AWS Identity and Access Management, this is one of the fun parts and one of the most used AWS services, and you need to understand this a lot. One of my students that just got the job, I think one of his first tasks is under this. They ask him to grant access to to a developer. And he was able to do this because he understands the AWS Identity and Access Management. So, and I also have another student that this is since he got job like almost 1.5 years now, he has only been working on the access management. He's granting access to people, or removing access, granting access to application, and doing a lot of things with access management. There is a lot of things you can do with access management, and there are some people that they only employ them as IAM engineer. IAM engineer simply means Identity and Access Management engineer, and all they do is granting access, removing access from application and users and service provider. So please pay more attention on this access management. So when we talk about access management, Identity and Access Management, Identity and Access Management is a framework of policy, technologies, and process that ensure the right individual, application, or services have appropriate access to technology resources. Well, let me break this down. When we talk about access management, there are some components that you need to focus on, or some main components of Identity and Access Management. The first part of Identity and Access Management is the identification. Before you can give access to somebody to do something for you, or to come to your house, or to manage your AWS account for you, you need to identify them. When you get a job today, the first thing they will do for you is to identify you by checking your name, checking all your credentials. And once they identify you and they certify that you are who you said you are, then they are going to give you like a access, not even access, they are going to give you like a name to make sure that, okay, this is the person that we verified. And that name is normally called the username. So when we talk about identity and access management, identity is the first component. Then the second component is authentication. After they identify you, then they need to authenticate you. Authentication simply means giving you access to the environment. Giving you access to the environment does not mean they give you permission to do anything. A company might give you access to come and see what they do, but they are not giving you permission to come and do what they do, right? So the next part, or the next component under the identity and access management, is the authorization. So these three parts form the main part, or the main component of identity and access management. So let's take the identity part of the IAM. Let's look at the identity part of the IAM. When we talk about the identity is the process of identifying or recognizing somebody. And when you want to identify them, you need to give them, once you have verified their document that they say they are who they have, you give them a username, so that next time you are not trying to verify them again, because you already verified them, and that's why you give them a username. So example, username is not the only way you can identify somebody. There are different ways, but the main one is username. You can also use account number. Maybe we are dealing with a bank. Once the bank look at your information, or they know that, okay, this is your address, this is your name, this is your age, this is what you are, then they give you an account number that identifies you. And in some cases, they give you a PVI card. That's why you see some people, especially those people that work in government offices or government agents, they have a badge and they just scan their badge. The badge, the first thing that the badge does is that they identify them. And that's why you see their picture on it. Then, once you are identified, then they move you to the next level, which is the authentication. On the authentication side, the authentication is what a user must provide to prove their identity. If I identify you and I give you a username, you can give that username to anybody, or anybody that sees your ID card and they see your name, they can say, hey, they are who they are not, by impersonating you. But in order for this not to happen, the identified person also needs to provide, the identified person an authentication to prove that they are who they said they are. And this, we can do that in different ways. One of the most common way of authenticating people is through password. So when you combine the username and the password together, then it proves that you are who you say you are, and that's why we give you access. That's why you go to your bank, they say we put your username to identify you, they put your password to authenticate you. Together, both of them give you access to your bank account. Then there are other ways of authenticating people. You can use biometric. Like there is now a lot of technologies. You look into your phone and it's unlocked. You put in your fingerprint, it's unlocked. So all these ways, there are multiple. Parts of authenticating people. And there is another one which is on security token. All these different ways of authenticating people are what we refer to factors of authentications, or factors of authentication. The factors of authentication goes in form of something you know, which is either your username or your password, you know it, and something you have, which is like a token, a smart card, or all those things. Then something you have, which is like something you have, your high brand, your high ball. So those, you can also use it to authenticate you. Together, companies combine this together in order to provide you a more secure way of authenticating. And this is what we refer to as multi-factors authentication, MFA. And most companies these days, if you are not using MFA, they won't allow you to log in because this is more secure than just using one form of authentication. So when you combine two different forms of authentication, either something you know plus something you have, or something you know plus something you have, or something you have plus something you have, when you combine any one of them together, then that is what we refer to as multi-factor authentication. So the third part of identity and access management is authorization. Oh, sorry. I'm supposed to change this part. Authentication is supposed to be authorization. I didn't change it. Sorry about that. It's supposed to be authorization. So the authorization part, or the authorization part of the authorization part of the identity and access management. When we talk about the authorization, once you authenticate or once authenticated, the system determines what resources the user can access and what the users can do. So let's look at this. Let's say these are our available services on AWS. These available services is a lot, but you don't have access to all of them as a user. The account owners, after identifying you and authenticating you, we access or we assign some of these services or resources to you, to your username. So once you provide your username and password, once you type in, let's say I type in my username, A at the end, and I put in my password, then once I click submit button, it's going to show me only what I am authorized to access. And you can see among the available service, I'm only giving 5 services or 5 resources. So this is authorization. So I can perform the service or activities on these 5 services. Why does this person or the account owner give me this small service out of the available resources, or give me small resources out of this huge number of resources? Well, this method of giving small resources to me is what we refer to as principle of least privilege, or the person is using the principle of least privilege. So this brings us to the introduction to the principle of least privilege. When we talk about principle of least privilege, which is when granting access or authorization to users, maybe to your AWS account or any of your resources, following the principle of least privilege is highly recommended. And this simply means that you only grant access to what the user needs to perform their activity. So when we say what is a principle of least privilege, this means giving a user or a system only those privilege or access to perform the essential activities that they need to perform. If you employ a cleaner today, then you're only going to give them access to where they need to clean. Or you employ a chef, a cook today, you only give access to your kitchen. I'm not going to employ a cook or a chef and give them access to my bedroom, or give them access to my wardrobe, or give them access to my bank account, because they don't need access to all those. They only need access to the kitchen and they stay there. If you employ somebody to come and mow your lawn or to cut your grasses, you only need to give them access to your outside, to your compound. There's no grasses in my bedroom, so you have no business in my bedroom. The same thing in the cloud, the same thing in IT. You only want to give access to what somebody can do or what they need to be able to do. You only need to give them access to what they need, what they are, or what they can, or what they should be able to do. And that is what we refer to as principle of least privilege. If I take you back up one step, and this is what happens here. You see, we have all of these resources. Maybe this user, ADME, only need to perform these 5 services, and you only need to give them these 5 services and nothing more. So what are the benefits of this privilege? Well, you grant access as needed. You don't give too much access. You only give them access to what they need. You grant access to data and other resources to only the people who really need it. And this does not mean granting access to user alone. Let's say you have a group of users. You only give each group or each users to what they need. And the benefit of this is, or how you can accomplish this, is that you start with denying access to everything. You deny a user access to everything. Then you start giving them access as they need it. This is a good way of giving access. Instead of just granting them access to everything, then be removing the access later one by one. The one they are not using, you remove it. If you are not using this one, you remove it. That is not the best way of doing it. The best way is deny them access entirely. Then when they need access to a specific thing, you only grant them access to that thing alone. Then it also enforces separation of duty. So now I can only grant access to somebody because that is what your line of duty is. And I can now give another person another access, which is what their line of duty is. So now we can easily separate or enforce the separation of duty with appropriate authorization for each interaction with our AWS accounts. The third one is that you're going to avoid long-term credential. You're going to avoid long-term credential because when you only grant access to somebody what they need, then immediately the person does not need the access again, you remove it. Because it's so clear now that, okay, this person only have five access to these 5 resources. You can monitor that 5 easily by looking at, okay, this person has not been using this access, or he has not been authorized, he has not been using these resources for the past 5 months that we give access to it. Then you can remove that. But if you give them too much access or too much authorization, you won't know which one they are not using. So it's going to be difficult to remove the one they are not using. So when you give them small authorization or access to small resources or authorization to small resources, then it's easy to manage. AWS provides us a service that we can use to manage access to our AWS environment. And this service is called AWS Identity and Access Management, popularly known as AWS IAM. And here is the icon. When you see this icon, it's talking about AWS IAM. So the features of the AWS IAM is that it enables you to manage access to your AWS services and resources securely. You can also use it, or using IAM, you are able to implement the principle of least privilege that we discussed earlier. You are able to enforce separation of duty as people interact with your account. And also, you can now manage access centrally. And this is one thing I like about security. And this part of security is actually advanced security. When people manage access, they manage access individually in individual accounts. But the best ways of managing access is managing it centrally. So that, for example, if you have 10 accounts, I know majority of you only have 1 account, and that is okay for the trading. But companies do not have 1 account. Companies have accounts, minimum of 2. Some of my students, there's one of my students, they have almost 500 accounts. Me, myself, I work with a client that have almost 1,000 accounts. Yes, AWS 1,000 accounts. So when you are managing these huge accounts, then you don't want to manage it, access to it, account by account. You want to manage it centrally. So that you just create the user in 1 account, and automatically the user will have access to every other account that they need access to. And with AWS IAM, you can audit a user's password, and you can also ensure their access are rotated. That means the password key are rotated in order to ensure that you are compliant with regulatories. So what are the components of IAM that you should be aware of? Users. This is where you create the users on AWS IAM. So I'm going to log into my AWS account. I'm going to join you this as we go. So now I've logged into my AWS account. So you need to go to the IAM. You can click on it here, or you can locate it among the favorites. So now I'm on my IAM. The first one is access, and you can have access reports, but our focus is going to be on access management. If you want to create a user, go to IAM users, and you click it, you specify the username, and you can select if you want to give them access to the console, which I'm going to click yes, and immediately you can create these users. So I'm going to be using this for some reason. And once you specify that I want to create an IAM user, then you have to provide the password, which is authentication. This first one is the identification, and the second part is the authentication. So I'm going to use a password, and this password is just, let me see. So I use a very easy password called password 111. Let me put a symbol to make it a little bit secure. Password 111, then add. So I'm going to delete this immediately after the class, so don't bother to try to log into it. So I'm going to remove this, that you should not change the password after login. Then I'm going to click on next. So this tool that I did is the authentication, the identification, the 2 parts, this first 2 parts. This is the identification part, and this is the authentication part. Then it's going to take me to the 3rd part, which is the authorization. So this is where I will set permission to what the user can do. And to set the permission, you can use any of these. So I'm going to go to attach policy. So these are the policy that I have already in my account. So if I want the person to be able to do something, I'll just click any one of these, and that is exactly what the only thing the person will be able to do. Let's say, for example, yesterday we discussed about S3. Let's say, for example, I want to give this person to be able to do everything regarding S3 in my account. So I'm just going to select I'm giving you permission to have Amazon S3 full access. So this means that the person will be able to do everything that has to do with S3. You can see S3 asterisk, meaning everything on S3 is what the person can do on my account. So when I click on next, then it takes me to the next level, then I can create the users. So this is how to create a user. You can see I have a user name and a user password. Then when the user log in, it's going to log in through this miss. Let me just go ahead and log in. I'm putting that in a different browser so that it will not override my login. So I'm going to provide the username. The account is already provided once you copy that link. Or if you don't have the link, you come in. If you don't use this link, you can come here and copy the account number. When you want to get the account number, then you can. Once you get the account number, you can now put in the account number in this place and then put in your username, then put in the password. Here's my password. And I log into this. Then I can say login. So I can say remember this. So now I've been able to log in. Right? So I'm going to go back to you can see it's denying some access because everything that is denying access to those are what we didn't give access to that person. So for example, remember we gave the access on full access to S3. If the person go and do anything on S3, you'll be able to do it because that is where we can't access to. But if the person go to where we didn't grant access to, let's say for example VPC, we didn't give him access to VPC. Immediately he gets to VPC and he tries to do something, his access will be denied. You can see all of this is showing try because he doesn't have access to it. If the person still tries to do something, like let's say he wants to create a VPC, you can see it say you are not authorized to perform this operation. So it is the only thing that we grant access to that the person will be able to do. So let's go back to our presentation. So that's the first thing. You can use IAM to manage users. You can read all those there. Then when you create a user, you need to give them permission. The permission is actually in form of policy. It's actually in form of policy. So let's assume now that I employ a cook today, cook or a chef. The way I'm going to give this permission is that I will list it in what is called a policy document. And this is where I will list what the person can do. I'll say you have access to kitchen. You have access to pantry. You have access to stove. And you have access to dishwasher. So these are me giving the person instruction. So this instruction, how do I grant it to the person? I will create a username for the person. I will say maybe a.chef. I'll give him password, maybe password 111. Then once I create these two, I will attach this policy to the user, to these two information. So anytime the user use this and this to sign in, automatically they will have access to all of this. So the policy, what the person can do is always written in the policy document. And if you take this back to the cloud, when you create a user and a username, you have to create a policy. It is the policy that you attached to their name. So that is how they'll be able to perform something. So let's take a look at the policy. And a policy on AWS, which is normally called an IAM policy, is a document that allows or denies permission to AWS resources. And an IAM policy allows you to customize users' level of access to resources. And for example, you can allow users to access all of your S3 buckets within your account or only a specific bucket. The policy we created earlier is a policy, or the user that we created earlier, we grant that user S3 full access. So what that simply means is that this user will be able to do anything or be able to do anything on our S3 bucket. He can create any bucket, view all buckets, delete bucket, any bucket, and so on. Because we grant it full access. But we can limit this access to specific, maybe S3 view access only. So once we say S3 view access only, then we can limit this to, this will limit the user to only view all buckets. And this user will not be able to delete and not be able to create. And this is the best way. You only grant people what they need. If this user is an auditor, if it's an auditor, then as an auditor, you don't need access to create buckets because you are not creating any buckets. You don't need access to delete because you don't need to delete anything. All an auditor just need is view. Then you can grant them view access. And the best way of giving access or writing your policy document is to follow the principle of the least privilege when you are granting permission. And this is how the format looks like, or the document looks like. You're going to have a version. You're going to have, under that version, you're going to have the statements. And in the statement, that is where you specify the effect. The effect is of two types. It's either allow or deny. When you talk about the allow or deny, this is whether you are telling that person that, hey, this policy that I'm writing, I want to use it to allow you access to something, or I want to use it to deny your access. You can write a policy that will deny somebody access, or you can write a policy that only give allow. So example of the chef that I was talking about earlier, or the example I used earlier, I actually wrote what I want to give access to, but you can write it in the reverse order by saying you are denying access to bedroom, denying access to backyard, denying access to excuse me, deny access to laundry room, or deny access to garage. So, but you can write it in another means by saying, okay, you are writing it in a direct way. I'm granting access to this, and that. So this is the policy document. This is how it looks like. And the version, you have to specify it, because you have to specify it so that your policy can be checked against the current version, because AWS have a previous version before, which is version 2008, 10.17. But the current one is 2012, 10.17. And if you don't put the correct version here, if you write a statement, the statement might not be correct. If you are using the current version to write the statement, you might be getting some error that, hey, this statement is wrong, or this statement is right. It's just that it's checking that statement against a previous check or previous version. And the effect specify whether the statement results in an allow or a deny. You only have two valid options, allow or deny. And the action specify what the person can actually do. This action too is wrong. I apologize for that. I didn't review it before I bring it up. So the action is only specify what the person can actually do on your account. And the resources is what the person can do that action on. If I give you access to my kitchen, the access can either be allowed or denied. Let's say I'm allowing you access to my kitchen. Then the action, because I'm allowing you to my kitchen, then that is an allow effect. Then the action is I'm giving you access to a specific thing in my kitchen. Then I'm giving you access to my kitchen, which is the main action there, my kitchen. Then in my kitchen, I can now reduce that access to what resources precisely do I want to give you access to. Do I want to give you access to everything or just the stove? Then that is like the resources there. So another component of the IAM is group. So when we talk about group, if you have multiple users that can do exactly the same thing, then instead of creating them user by user, you can create a group for them. Let's assume that, example, we have developers in our organization, and these developers, under these developers, we have Tom, we have Jerry, and we have Lion King. Let's say these are the three developers we have in our organization: Tom, Jerry, and Lion King. If all of them are developers and they can do exactly the same thing, one way of managing access for each one of them is that you create Tom, you create him policy itself, you create Jerry, you give him policy, the same policy. Then you create Lion King as a user. You also create policy for that user. This is okay, but it's not scalable. Now there are three. What if in a future time they turn to 3,000? I'm going to be creating user for every one of them. And what happened if Tom leave our company? Then you have to go to Tom and remove his policy. That is also easy to do. What if Jerry is moved away from developer and is moved to security department? Then after, okay, let's say he moves to from developer to automation engineer. As a developer and automation engineer, there are some things that is common. So Jerry as a developer and Jerry as an automation engineer now, there are some services that overlaps that Jerry will still be able to do as a automation, and there are some services that he won't be able to do again because he's not a developer anymore. So you need to go to the system and remove those policy or the authorization that Jerry should not be able to do. So going to the system and removing them one by one is going to cause a lot of things. You will remove some of them and we forget to remove some of them. So this is not a good way of managing users. Another alternative way of managing user is to create those users and add them in a group. So for Tom and Jerry and Lion King, because they are all the same developer, you can just add them or create a developer group and add all of them to the developer group. So instead of adding permission to each users, you just add or attach policy to the group. So anybody or any member of the group will have access to the policy. Let's say the policy is S3 full access. So all of them are going to have S3 full access. If any one of them, like Jerry, move away from developer, is now an automation engineer, you just remove Jerry from here. You remove him, then you can go and add him under automation group. And it's going to have access to the policy that is attached to automation group. And that's another way of managing multiple users that do exactly the same thing. And here is what you're saying here: developer 1, developer 2, developer 3, all of them, you add them to developer group and they have access to exactly the same thing. When we talk about creating users individually, it's okay, but when you are dealing with multiple accounts, let me bring out all of this back. When you are dealing with multiple accounts, let's say you are dealing with 3 accounts now, maybe your company has 3 accounts. A user might only need 1 account, or he might work 90% of the time on account A and only 77% of the time on account B and 3% on account C. Well, you don't want to give this user access to all of the accounts. I mean, you want to let the user have access to all the accounts, but necessarily you don't need to create user for them. Like, let's say this is still Jerry. You don't have to create Jerry as a user here, Jerry as a user here, Jerry as a user here. What you can do is just to create Jerry in only one place. Here. And here, the remaining accounts, you just create what you call a row. And you have to specify in that row that Jerry, that is in account A, can come and use this row in account B and can use the row in account C. So technically, Jerry can still perform his 70% task here and he can perform his 3% task here. But what Jerry do not have is that we don't create Jerry username in this account. We only create a row for him so we can use this row. So when we talk about a row is just like a means of granting authentication. So when you create a row, a user, a row name, and you're going to create a policy and you attach this policy to the row. So anybody can use that row as long as you specify when you are creating the row, there is something called policy that you have to attach to the row. And there's another thing that is called trusted relation. The trusted relation is just who can use this row. Who can use, while the policy is what they can do. So when you specify in your trusted relation who can use this row and what they can do, if Jerry is part of the trusted relation, then Jerry can come and use the row. If Tom is part of the trusted relation, Tom can also use the row and we have access to all the policy. But now you can see that we are not creating it specifically for one person. We just create the row. You now say anybody that is part of the trusted relation can use the row. And let me go to the AWS and quickly show you how you specify that. So I'm going back to the IAM. If you look at the row, when you go to under row, let me click one of the row that I already created. If you look at this row, there is permission. This is what the person, whoever can use this row, can do. It can do everything administrative access, and it can also have access to Amazon SMS managed instance call. But who are these people that can use this row? Then if you look at the trusted relation, the principal, these two are the people that can use it. But in this case, I did not specify a specific user. But what I did specify here is an AWS account. And I also specify an EC2. But let's go back earlier. Let's look at this person. We created these users. If I want to specify it is this user that can use that row, this is how I'm going to specify it. I'm going to look for these users ARN. This is it. This is where you can identify somebody. Then I'll go back to the row. If I'm creating a new row now, I have to specify the trusted entity, which is also the trusted relation. This is where you specify the trusted relation. You have to specify here who can use the row. Is it a service, an account, an identity, web identity, a SAMI federation, or a custom trusted policy? I'm going to go with a trusted policy here because I want to create my own. I don't want to use any one of those. Here, under the principal, that is where I'm going to specify it. I'll just say it's going to be AWS, but you have to put it in column like this. It's going to be AWS, and it's going to be these users. And this user also has to be in column like this. So now, if I create this row, only these users can use it. If I want other users to use it, I'll just need to put this in bracket and specify multiple users. If I have a user that is called Jerry, if I've created Jerry, I'll just also put Jerry. Then I need to do this. So now what simply means is that both Jerry and ADME can use the row. But here I don't have Jerry currently. I only have ADME. So I'm going to remove that and I'm going to just say only Jerry can use, only ADME can use this row. So this is me specifying the trusted relation. So then once you specify the trusted relation, you have to go and add the policy, what the person can do. If I'm granting permission to EC2 only, I can click this. And so the person will only be able to do EC2 full access, anything that has to do with EC2. And you want to see what is EC2 full access, if you click this button, it will tell you what the person can do. Okay, you can see it's a asterisk, which means everything on EC2. Then if I go next, then I just need to give this row a name. I can just say on a row. This is not a very good naming convention. The row has to show you what the person can do. I can say allow access to EC2 full access, or just allow EC2 full access. Then I need to save this. So anytime now, Even if Yenny is not a user in this account, he can still use that role. Now that he's a user, he can either use his name, use username and password, or use this role. So this is under IAM. I already explained who can assume a role. A role can be assumed by a user in the same account or a user from another account. A role can be assumed or an application, or a role can be assumed by an application or a resources in the same account or in other accounts. So this is what this means. But before that, let me complete it. So a role can also be assumed by application in the same account or other accounts or a service. So this is what I mean. Let's say I have an account here called account A, then I have an account called account B, then the third account called account C. If I create a user in this account A called A Adeyemi, then I create a role called EC2 full access. Then here I also create the same role EC2 full access. And here I create the same role EC2 full access. A Adeyemi can assume the role in this account, and can also assume this role in the other account. And EC2, which is a service, can also assume a role in the account they belong, or they can assume a role in the other account that they do not belong. An application too can assume a role in the account they belong, and can also assume a role in the account that they do not belong. The only thing is that before they can assume this role, they must be added under the trusted entity or the trusted relation. So you can see that the trusted entity or trusted relation, because if you go back here, if you go under the account that already exists, you will see it as trusted relation. They must be added here. This is me adding an EC2. That EC2 service can use this role. But if you go back, like you are just creating the role, it's going to be trusted entity. So that is why they use them interchangeably, whether trusted relation or trusted entity. Another component of IAM, what you can do with IAM is that you can use it to configure your multi-factor authentication. And we did it in one of the class when we started. I believe when we created our AWS accounts, we created an MFA. So you create your MFM using IAM. When you have an MFM, the way it works is that you're going to log in with your normal username and you put in your password. Once you put your username and your password, it brings a confirmation code, verification code, which is for the MFM. Then you go to your phone number, your phone, you copy the code that the software generated. Then you put it in the verification code. And when you press enter, it's going to enable you to the service that is assigned to your name alone. So this is the end of IAM. In the next class, I'm going to talk about AWS organization. AWS organization is used to manage multiple accounts. The reason why some people are unable to get job is because whenever they are in interview, they are answering interview questions as if they are just managing, or the organization they have worked with only have one account, and they are answering their question in relation to one account. Organization doesn't use one account, they use multiple accounts. So if you want to really go for an interview and pass the interview, you must know how to manage, or how to help your organization to manage multiple accounts. So how do you manage multiple accounts on AWS? AWS provides a service that you can use to manage multiple accounts centrally, and that service is called AWS organization. So in our next class, we're going to talk about AWS organization. Somebody actually reached out to me that how can they join the class? That they're watching our YouTube video, I like it, but how can you join? If you go to the description box, I will try to put in the link to the Telegram, so you can join the Telegram, and from there you have access to the Zoom link to join the class. All right. Any question, class? Any question? Any question? All right. If you guys do not have any, if you don't have question, I appreciate you for coming to the class. And don't forget that you can always post your question in the Telegram, or if you are watching it on the YouTube, you can post your question or comment in the comment section. If I see it, I will address it. If it's something that I have to walk you through, I can create a video and use the video to explain that. All right. I want to appreciate you for coming for today's class, and see you in the next class, which is tomorrow on Sunday 4 to 6 p.m. Central. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.